Welcome to another episode in our e-bike Lite Shootout. Today we've got the YT Decoy SN. Let's get into it and see how it rode. So before we get into the ride characteristics and spec details on the Decoy SN, we'd like to take a second and thank Schwalbe Tires, Outdoor Research, and Ride Concepts Shoes for helping make this series possible. It took a lot of work and a lot of manpower to make this happen. So with 11 bikes, that's 12 videos. So huge thanks to those brands for helping make this happen. So the Decoy SN weighs in at 45.6 pounds for the size large we have. The MSRP is $64.99. It is a Fazua equipped bike with a internal 430 watt hour battery. We did end up having some problems on this drive unit. I pulled it out at one of the trailheads one day, but after doing that and doing the old Nintendo kind of unplug and blow and plugging it back in, it worked 98% of the time after that. So yeah, we'll call that a win, I guess. But overall, a pretty solid spec for the price. I'd say one of the better values in the test. Yeah, I thought that was pretty solid and stand out. The Geo, I thought, was really good. 475 reach was, for me, something I really like on an e-bike. It's a 160, 170 mullet bike. So let's get into some of the ride impressions and characteristics. Travis, you want to lead it off? I know you like this bike a lot. Let's talk climbing in your test loop.
Yeah, I really like this bike. I think climbing, it was just easy. I mean, you felt centered on the bike. You weren't too far over the front, too far over the back. The suspension platform was supportive, and it just kind of chugged up the hill. I mean, the Fazua, it's, you know, we all kind of want that Amflow DGI motor in it, but for me it was like the Fazua was plenty power to get me up the hill. And yeah, the geometry, like you were saying, you know, it just put you in a good climbing position and felt efficient without just absolutely gassing you.
Okay, yeah, and I thought the suspension platform was pretty compliant and comfortable. It wasn't like overly harsh or stiff to beat you up. And overall a pretty solid climbing bike. No awkward or weird negative characteristics. Jared, what were your thoughts?
I mean, the thing that's always compelling about YT bikes is that you get a bike that's generally a good looking bike at a, you know, direct to consumer price. I mean, I think it's great to support bike shops, but you can't deny that these bikes come spec really nice for the price. Like you said, the geometry on this bike was easy to get along with. The numbers it checks a lot of boxes on paper.
Like but I do notice you staring at that stem a lot.
Yeah, so, you know, in this day and era where there's certain things that seem to be standard on bikes, e-bikes 160 to 165 cranks to keep them short so that they can have lower bottom brackets and not clap on rocks. Shorter stems generally. This stem I think maybe is a 50. It's certainly not a 40. So a couple spec choices maybe that I would change here and there, but overall, like, for the price, I love that it came with a Zeb and a Vivid Select. The TRP brakes are some of my favorite.
Big thumbs up.
I like the two-tone gloss and flat as far as an aesthetic goes. Yeah, it's a fun bike to ride. You know, like, I noticed a little bit of noise in the frame. I wouldn't say it was a noisy bike, but I heard something going on once in a while. As you mentioned before, we did have issues with this motor not working, but in fairness, there's 4 of these Fazuas on test. Yeah. So like, I don't know if it's so much of a YT problem as maybe a connection issue that needed to be reconnected on a Fazua. So yeah.
Yeah, none of the other ones had problems.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, this bike was pretty high up for me, but like obviously it sucks when you're going up a hill and the motor cuts out and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this, like, it's all your own power. But I think I was kind of banking on the fact that it's probably just a connection issue. All the other Fazua motors were fine.
Yeah, but still, nevertheless, something worth pointing out. And you know, it's hard to not see comments in other reviews or other Fazua issues. So I think, yeah, it's something that we got to point out. And you know, that's another thing with the consumer direct brand. You know, on the flip side is, like, if you bought it at a dealer, maybe you would have better luck going to a dealer if you needed service rather than kind of like being far away and having to rely on an email to get support. But yeah, nevertheless, like you said, we've had plenty of Fazua equipped bikes, and I think this might be the second or third one we've had an issue on, which is, you know, higher than some, but also not a ton. So I don't know, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Frame feature stuff that you're talking about, the two-tone color, I also really like that. And I know a lot of frames nowadays come with, you know, bolts, but I like that they sent the frame with that little, you know, accessory or tube strap included. That's huge, and I just think that it's something we go out a lot without enough stuff to stay prepared to fix ourselves. And when you got something on the bike like that, it kind of eliminates one thing you got to carry on you and make you a little more self-reliant, I guess.
And especially with e-bikes, right? Because like, why not strap a little bit of weight to the bike to have everything you need, because you've got the motor there to help carry it. I love that I agree that strap came there. It's probably more likely to actually carry a tube with you.
Yeah. And
when you've got a e-bike that's at least, you know, 10 pounds heavier than your normal bike, you probably are more likely to use a tube at some point.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, I think, where did the bike stand out or shine most for you guys?
I thought it was just a very easy bike to ride technically and aggressive with.
Okay.
It wasn't my favorite bike in all categories. It certainly wasn't my favorite bike to corner with. That's just me. So, you know, we're all different. But descending and riding through technical stuff, I really enjoyed it. I love that this bike comes in at a good price point and gives you a pretty powerful motor in the SL class and a mullet. Just a lot to like there.
Okay. Travis?
Yeah, I thought that it just kind of did everything well.
Yeah.
When I'm considering a bike like this, I'm like, okay, I want to get something that gets me out a little bit further and, you know, maybe hopefully down a little bit crazier of terrain and trails. And I thought that this bike just kind of checked all of those boxes for me. I probably, as a dad, I'm not going to be going out for hours and hours and hours. So it's like that Fazua is just, it's adequate for what I need it to do. Descending, I thought that it was great, kind of like Jared was saying. It took care of all the rough and chunky stuff, even with a little shorter wheelbase. But I also then like the mullet setup for maybe getting a little bit playful. Like my initial ride on it, my very first like several hundred feet down the trail, I was like, oh, it's just kind of like another big squishy bike. But then like I started hitting some jumps and like finding some side hits and like, oh, this is actually a relatively playful bike at, you know, 160, 170. So yeah, I felt like it kind of just did everything well. I'm also a bit of a sucker for more moderate geometry, I guess. And there's probably going to be a lot of people that are like, oh, like a 64 head tube angle, like that's really slack, that's not moderate. You know, and it's kind of, that's relative, but I find myself kind of, I guess tending to lean towards a little bit steeper of a head tube angle, feel like I have a little bit more control. So this bike just kind of checked a lot of those boxes, and I really love the Vivid too. Like it's a great shock.
It's an absolutely great shock for sure, and yeah, definitely a standout. I liked this bike quite a bit. I did find that I kind of struggled sometimes with the rear shock. You know, I love the Ultimate, and the Select just takes away some of the tuning abilities, which I think really make that like my favorite shock on the market. But to me, I felt like some volume reducers were needed because I was on the trail when we were swapping setups between you know, people quickly to get air pressure to where I wanted, and the HBO hydraulic bottom out like where I wanted. I was kind of compromising on one end of the spectrum or the other in terms of like smaller bump sensitivity and harshness versus like end of stroke support. I think the bike really likes to get ridden fast, but it can feel a little lethargic before you get there. So like on flatter trails, I felt like it wasn't the bike that like would inspire me to get up out of the seat and crank hard to like get speed for like a little roller that I could gap into a double. It was kind of like, if I don't have the speed, I'll just kind of sit and cruise and just roll them. Whereas like some bikes you like round the corner, like you'd either have that speed already or you're like, oh, one crank and like I can gap this thing. Whereas like on this bike, it felt like it took a little bit more steepness and speed to like wake me up on top of it. But when you did get there, man, was
Yeah.
it awesome. Like there was a couple of things that I remember yanking for that were just like, the landings were pretty heinous, and it was just like, okay, I'm gonna try to make it into these holes and rocks, and I did, and like, dude, the suspension just ate it up, and I was like, okay, this is where this bike likes to live.
Right.
And yeah, so I think if you're a rider who has a little bit steeper, a little faster terrain, some bigger, chunkier stuff, man, this is a pretty sick bike, and I think our whole crew likes it. And for what it's worth, Robert over in the UK went to the media camp and rode one of these for a while, and I think this is one of his favorite e-bikes he said he's ridden. I think he said he's never been able to ride an e-bike as hard or shred as much as he did on this, so
Yeah, that's saying something.
that's worth something for
Yeah.
sure. So yeah, that's the YT Decoy SN, everybody. A really solid all-around bike, I think, with a couple limiting factors, or maybe, you know, terrain specific factors that might be worth considering. Then again, it is a 160, 170 mullet bike, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, some of the lethargic things that we talk about that maybe needs to be pushed, I mean, might be applicable to some of the other bikes that are the same size, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, if you like to ride fast and steep technical stuff, and you need something that's, you know, in that $6,000 to $7,000 range, and
Yeah.
you want a mullet, like,
This is up on the list.
this is right there.
Very high.
This
so.
is to check a lot of boxes for a lot of
Okay.
people.
Make sure you stay tuned. Our grand finale is coming up next, where this goes up against 10 other really awesome e-bike lights, and we're excited to share the results. And thanks again to our sponsors, Schwalbe Tires, Outdoor Research, and Ride Concepts Shoes. And also a thank you to the Running Y Resort for hosting us in Klamath Falls. The trails down here are awesome, and we love coming down to ride. So make sure you guys stay tuned for the grand finale. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys out on the trails.